Anya, and today I'll be critiquing more of my viewers' art. So the last critiquing my viewers' art video was really quite successful, and it was really heartwarming to hear the positive responses not only from the people whose artwork I critiqued, but from other people who found that information useful too. So I thought, yes, let's do another one, let's keep going. If you'd like your artwork to potentially be critiqued by me, submit your work to the hashtag meppitycritique on Instagram, and also be sure to tag me. But please only enter one post per person, and I do check, otherwise it won't count and I won't look at any of your work at all. Before we get on to the new critiques, I just want to show you guys this work by Aria Doodles. So I critiqued her artwork last time, and she listened to my suggestions and actually redid the piece. And I'm overwhelmed at how incredible the adaptation is. It's like, they're only small changes because the skill was already there, but it's just made the piece so much better, and it just proves a point that, you know, sometimes just a couple little suggestions here and there can really improve things. Keep up the great work, and I do look forward to seeing what you post next. On to my first critique. So this is some artwork by Cup Paint Art, and I really like the colour scheme with the simple black and white but with the touch of red, which is very fitting to the theme. Why do all the red flags just look like so much fun? I love the texture in the hair and the clothing, and I can't tell if that's because you scanned the image in or if you added it in post, but either way I like it a lot. My main suggestions though are mostly to do with the actual structure of the body. So for example, the way that it looks here, you've used rather clean lines, so I may be wrong, but I view it that the back is quite straight and the head's coming down at a very sharp angle, and it just doesn't quite feel natural. So that, paired with the legs coming really high up and then coming out onto the knee, it just feels like a very uncomfortable pose, and I don't think that's exactly how someone would lean in the first place. The best way to fix things like this is to use direct reference. You know, take a picture of yourself, no one ever has to see it except for you, and base it off that. And then to make things even smoother, I may have mentioned this before, but lines of action are this really great thing, and I'm using it a lot in animation. I've learned about it like just the other day in one of my classes, and it's where you have this sort of curve of motion that the general body will follow, and it just provides this flow and this cohesivity to the pose, and it just makes it look a little less stiff. On top of that, I think there's just a couple logical things that I'm wondering about. For example, the flag in the hand on the ground, it goes straight down as if there's no floor, but then the hand, the clothing and the feet suggest that there is a floor. So I don't know if she's at an edge or something, but that doesn't quite work to me. And I also am just noticing the glasses. They are two different sizes, each lens. So I would just take a little bit of care checking to see if things are symmetrical enough when they're meant to be symmetrical, like glasses. Otherwise, I'm very happy with the actual composition and the idea. I really like how you've done the writing around the top and the bottom. I think that's very well done. And the font is very sweet. I like that a lot too. Awesome job, and you know I like your art, and I'm gonna keep looking at it in the future. On to this piece by Borrelia. Sorry if I've pronounced your name wrong, but this I believe is is this a Moomin character? I know nothing about this show or cartoon, I don't even know what it is, but I recognize the design. Either way, I love the atmosphere and the vibe that's coming off. I can really feel the emotions from the piece, and I do like the idea behind it. The composition is very cool, but there's a couple things that really stand out to me that I think need to be fixed. The first thing is the actual pose. So there's a need to create weight in drawings. That's something that comes with practice and studying anatomy, doing life drawing and things, and that allows a person or an animal, a general figure, to look like it belongs in its environment. So currently your character is sitting on the edge of this cliff, but it looks more like they're floating on like a quarter of their butt cheek, and I'm not sure how to describe it exactly, but that also with the shoes being at a similar angle despite feet not quite working that way, and the back being like too light, makes it look as if they're about to fall off the edge. And as someone who does not like the edges of things, like sheer drops, that scares me a little bit. So in order to fix this, I would move the character right back onto the cliff so that they don't look like they're gonna fall, and I would take a look at some clothing references. So like I said before, I think taking a reference image is a very good idea. You could just sit in a chair, that's all you need, and see how clothing wrinkles and how like the hips and the legs sit on in that position, and it'll help you get an idea of how you should position things and draw them in order to make it look more convincing in the space. The other thing about this figure is the lack of wrinkles in the fabric. Obviously it's a very stylistic thing, it's up to you, but I think in order to make it more convincing, you just need to add a couple, because there's some here and there, but I feel like it's not quite enough. You either have more or none at all, if that makes sense. I see you have a light source in the top left corner. I'm assuming it's the sun, but unfortunately the body doesn't quite reflect that, because the lighting is more as if it's on a back edge, as if it's more like behind the figure and below it. And I think what would help is adding a couple more harsh shadows. So what you could do is the entire front half of the body could just be darkened, or the entire back half could be lightened up. Additionally, the hat, the rim on the underneath could be darkened, because that will not be in the light, and the like underneath the trouser cuff as well could be darkened too. My final thing is the colours. I do like the colours, they're very friendly and warm, but I think that they don't quite match the actual weather, if that makes sense. So something that may sound really silly is that the grass isn't green and the sky isn't blue. So, you know, when you look out into the world, of course, grass is green, sky is blue, but it's never like just pure green or pure blue. So you've got the idea already with the sky, but this green grass is just a little bit too saturated, a little bit too bright to match the vibe and to be realistic enough. Even if it's stylized, it's something that I think you need to consider, and I would personally maybe mute it just a little bit, like desaturate it, brighten it, add a teeny bit of yellow, like just the tiniest bit, and it'll make it a more convincing color. With that grass, the texture doesn't match the rest of the image, so I personally suggest that you use a similar brush or the same brush to the one you used on the character. I mean, overall, I love the idea of this piece and I love the atmosphere. You've done a really good job. I look forward to seeing what you make next. Keep it up. This next piece is by Cakey, or they go by ClasXN on Instagram. Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But this is a gorgeous piece, and there's a lot of depth of emotion in the drawing. It's a traditional pencil piece, which I love. I haven't critiqued many of those recently, so I'm very intrigued looking at it. And you're definitely on your way with technique and approach to drawing. For example, the proportions are very good, and the hair is definitely going in the right direction, and you're very aware of your shading. I think the main thing now is just, honestly, like, this is something that'll come with time and practice more than anything, but I'll tell you anyway, is like the shading is a little bit inconsistent. So I know something that I struggled with, and many other artists struggle with when they start out with art, is they're too shy, I guess you could say, with their shading, where we are hyper aware of every single detail, but actually that shading just doesn't pick up at all. So I suggest being far more bold with your shadows and your highlights, and it'll really make the image pop. For example, the lips and the nose are kind of getting lost, and there's very little distinction between the head and the neck, and then the neck and the collar of the clothing. The hair, I absolutely love. I really love the texture that you've created. It feels so tangible, and like I want to touch that hair. My main suggestion with it though is to consistently have a direction or flow with the hair. So on the edges, you can see exactly where the hair is going. It's perfect. But then as you get into more of the mass of the hair, it kind of becomes a little bit lost, as if you've just colored it in dark. I mean, you have got some direction, but if you just made it slightly more obvious, I think that would really amp it up. On top of that, I don't know if you used a reference image or not, but that part in the top feels a little bit like something's missing. And even if the reference is like that, I do suggest just adding a little bit more bulk to the top of the head with hair, just to balance it out and make it look less like there's a hole there, if that makes sense. The texture on the clothing is also fantastic. I mean, you already have such a knack for the texture side of art. And I like the eyebrows, the eyes are pretty good, I like the freckles, the lips as well. I think my final suggestion, again, this is more of a personal preference thing, but I would get a white pen or a white pencil, something that's brighter than the rest of the image, and just add a couple select highlights. For example, in the eye to add some eye shine, and perhaps like on the lips or on the tip of the nose, maybe in the hair, and it'll really make the image just stand out. So with crisper shadows and crisper highlights, it just makes it more as if it could come out of the page at any second. This is fantastic work, keep it up. This next piece is by Jana Mattox, and I am absolutely in love with it. The second I clicked on it, I just couldn't stop looking at it. There's so much story. It really reminds me of Gravity Falls with like Bill Cipher and the eyes constantly watching and things. And the character designs are wonderful. I really like your style, your choices of color, but the main thing for me is your choice in composition. So I see where you're going with the piece, but I think it's just slightly wonky, but it's just wonky enough for it to be noticeable, and so the tiniest bit off-putting. Something I suggest with this is flipping your, because I see this is traditional watercolor, if you flip your piece in the mirror, you can take a look and see if it's symmetrical or not. Or the other thing you could do is, I mean, this is extra effort, but if you took a picture and then flipped the image and then took like another normal picture, then overlaid the two, you could then see where things don't quite line up. For example, on the right side, the piping and I think the handle for the stairs is just a little bit higher than on the other side, and the door is leaning slightly to the right as well. Oh no, it's leaning to the left, my bad. I also really like all the code words and the eyes, but I think in order to keep the composition very crisp, I would keep them just on the walls and the door rather than on the steps. I know exactly what you're going for with the eyes watching the guy, but I think it would be more effective if those eyes were staying just on the walls. I mean, personally, I think that it would be really interesting if some of them came out of the brickwork instead, but again, personal preference. Honestly, like that's up to you, not to me. Your choice of color, by giving it a red wash, is really good. It adds this very nice vibe to the piece. My only suggestion is that maybe you could make some parts even more red. Like for example, the metal railing, I think that could do with just being the slightest bit pinky-ish, and I think the girl's hair could be a little bit more pinkish too. Maybe some intenser shading in places could work, but honestly, like, I'm happy with how it is in terms of shading. I'm happy. So yeah, really good design, fantastic concept. I'm happy with this. Moving on, we're going to look at a slightly unconventional submission. So this is a character turnaround by EPSA Illustrations. I am in love with the character, I'm in love with the animation, and if you look closely, there's a moment where the character actually stops spinning and does some animated movement instead. And I think it's just fantastic. I am in love with this style, with this, like the very clean graphic lines and very angular triangle shaped stuff, even though the character still has this softness about her. The feet are well grounded, everything is spinning very nicely, and there's a consistent weight, like you feel like this is a three-dimensional creature. Honestly, there's very little to say about this because it's just so great to me. I think my main suggestions would be to find a specific anchor point with the spinning. So currently I can't actually tell at what point the character is rotating. So when I do character turnarounds, I almost exclusively use the neck. So maybe if I were you, I would keep the necklines in exactly the same spot at all times, and then that'll just make that turnaround that little bit more smooth when it spins. I think it would be really cool if you added more frames between the existing ones, just so that spin is a little smoother, and also you can actually focus on the details for a little bit longer, seeing as they're actually there for longer. In terms of the design of the character, I love the red eyes in contrast with the darker skin and the green clothing. My only question is just underneath the skirt, at the top of the legs, above the knee. I can't tell if that's like trousers or like leggings or something, or if that's a shadow. If it's not a shadow, I would suggest making it a different color, maybe like a red or something to match the eyes and the nails, just so that it's a little bit more clear as to what I'm looking at. Beyond that, I'm honestly elated with this piece. I think it's fantastic and I really can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks! Okay, this next piece is by Abivniv. I have no idea if I'm meant to pronounce it that way, but that's what you're going to be called now, Abivniv. I think the emotion in this is fantastic. There's like this real sense of, to me it's like a disgust almost at whatever's happening off screen. My main suggestions with this design is to do with the freckles and the shading / coloring. So going to the freckles first, what's happening is what I honestly think is a result of laziness. I am guilty of this too, especially when you're getting towards the end of a piece and you're just adding the final details, but you're like, oh, I want to be done already. Rather than like carefully placing each dot, you just gotta go pa, 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 pa. And the fact of the matter is your pen is often going to slip slightly, and so rather than creating dots, it's going to have lines and dashes all over the place. But in reality, freckles don't really come as dashes, or at least not as far as I'm aware. So I suggest just taking that little bit of extra time to more selectively place your dots so that they're neater. And also, on top of that, none of the dots actually really reach the edge of the skin. So it looks as if they only exist in certain patches, if that makes sense. For example, on the left side of the face, near the ear and by the hairline, there's just no dots going closer to the hairline. And so it just feels a little bit unnatural, if you understand what I mean. Something else to consider is your line work. I think it's an illusion that high-level artists have, where they're just amazing at drawing lines all the time. I mean, yes, they have been practicing for a long time and they are probably more improved and trained than other like average artists, but if you've ever actually watched someone do digital art, you will see they'll do a line, then they'll do it, then they'll redo it and do it, redo it and do it, and sometimes it can take like 20 attempts to get the line just perfect. So I think that allowing yourself to take your time and to really focus on making it as clean as possible without adding like these little flicks or making it wobbly can really do your piece justice. Okay, going to the shading and coloring, I think your color choice is good. My only thing is the background makes her and the clothing, like the clothing blends in with the background. If you want to do that, that's fine. I just would maybe change the purple in the clothing to be a little bit lighter, but it's up to you. And the colors are all quite saturated and bright, and that's fine, you know, it depends on people's style. But my personal suggestion would be to possibly mute some of the colors. If I was muting something, would mute the clothes or the background just to give the eyes a bit of a break. And in terms of shading, I think you are just a little bit confused as to where your light source is. If it's flat on, generally the best idea is to have a little bit under the neck as you've done, and maybe a little bit under the hair as you've also done. But then you have it on the side of the face here as well, and you have it either side of the braids. And so I'm getting a little bit lost. I don't actually know where the lighting's coming from. Also, some places should have shading that don't. For example, something I'll always do is I always have shading in the top part of the eye, because you know we have eyelashes and lids, so it naturally creates this shadow from almost any angle. Also, perhaps like on the bottom parts of the braids. that's mostly it, I think, for this particular pose. And with those shadows, I do suggest that you intensify them. Like I said earlier in the video, a lot of the time people are just a bit shy with their shading, and so it just doesn't have enough oomph. But if you really darken them, then the shadows like stand out, make the piece stand out too. Anyway, I love the style, I love the design, I really think it's a fantastic design, and you're doing great. Okay, for the final piece, we're going to look at this one by Incbird. So I think this is really great design, and there's a lot of emotion again. The composition is pretty good. In terms of that, I think I would just move the whole thing ever so slightly to the left. Otherwise, honestly, it's fine. My main thing I want to talk about with this one is your shading. So you're very confident in terms of value, light and dark. And the best way of knowing this is if you put an overlay or if you made it black and white, you would be able to tell like the forms and where the light source is, and you've done a good job at that. But the issue I have with it is that it's very smudgy. So this is something that I think most artists go through, especially with digital art, is that you don't allow yourself to have like crisp lines and crisp shadows. And so it leads to this kind of airbrushed look that doesn't exist in real life. I mean, yes, I know you get models that are photoshopped and airbrushed to pieces, but again, that's not real life. And so in order to create this more believable coloring, I would suggest just sticking with a hard brush. I mean, I personally on Procreate use Nico Rull, which is this textured, like very clean edged piece, and it just has this strength to it that if you turn the opacity down a little bit, you know, it doesn't have to be 100% opacity, but if you have it maybe around 70 or something, but with pen pressure sensitivity, then it just looks that bit more impactful. Honestly, I'm just saying words at this point, but in general, yeah, just avoid like the smudgy look. On top of that, I think with the clothing, you have not got near as much detail as you have in the face, and so this contrast is a little bit jarring. So of course I know with all artists we almost always concentrate on just the face, you know, it's the most important part, and then we kind of just neglect the rest of the piece. We kind of just do it to get it done, and so that the piece is like, yep, finished. But I think if you spent more time on, for example, like the necklace being thick and with this blue edged lighting, if you like really considered it and looked at it, I would probably just draw one single neat gold line. It doesn't need that blue edge. And with the fabric, I would maybe concentrate more on the shadows of it and adding more wrinkles to make it look a little bit more realistic and less flat. It's a really good piece, and I think just that little bit of focus on shading cleanly is gonna take you far. Nice job, Incbird. Alright, so that's all the critiquing for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I hope you found it useful despite me having no like professional training in critiquing. I mean, I've only been in art school for a week, but either way, yeah, hope you enjoyed, and don't forget that if you want to submit your work, check out the description down below. All the information is there. The hashtag is meppitycritique, and I look forward to seeing everyone's work in the future. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. Also, why not follow my Instagrams at anya.arts and meppity. Anya.arts is more for polished drawings, whilst Meppity is more for doodles and sketches. And I think that's where I'll be including some like life drawing assignments and things from school. I'll see you guys soon. Bye!